Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Jennifer Monthi. I'm with Disability Rights New York. I want to start by introducing you to the Special Education Task Force. The New York State Special Education Task Force was originally formed as a local task force in the Capital Region, and it focused on improving educational outcomes for students with disabilities. The task force was purposeful in promoting participation and collaboration among all stakeholders, including parents, advocates, attorneys, school personnel, service providers, educators, government representatives, and also individuals with disabilities. Because of the success of that model, the Capital District Task Force unanimously agreed to promote the development of the task force in other regions across the state while establishing a statewide special education task force to support, facilitate, and represent the regional task force. Today, you're participating in a lunch and learn session. We are hosting several of these over the next few months. The next session will be on April 10th and will be on special education quality assurance with a speaker from the New York State Education Department. I am going to share in the chat a link to the task force website, which includes a video explaining in more detail about the task force. I encourage you to consider joining a task force in your area if you have some interest, as well as getting announcements through our listserv. I also have the great pleasure of introducing our two speakers today. Lucia Nicholas is a certified school psychologist from the Saratoga Springs City School District, and Steve Oil is a family peer advocate from the Northern Rivers Family of Services. I'm going to turn it over to our two speakers now.
Thank you, Jen, and thank you, Alyssa. My name's Steve Oil. I began my advocacy career in the year 2000 when my now 26-year-old son was diagnosed with autism. And I had to quickly learn how to advocate for his needs, and he was a toddler. Through that experience, I've been in human services since 1987 when I had really, really nice hair. And now I started switching the work that I used to do in human services into family support and advocacy, helping parents navigate the system. So that covers it. I am also credentialed as a family peer advocate, which is a process that peer advocates in New York State can go through and attain. So we've been building the credibility of the work that we do. So I work at Northern Rivers Family Services, Schenectady County, and I'm very excited to be here today. I hope you get something out of our presentation. Now I'd like to pass this over to Lucia so she can introduce herself for us.
Thanks, Steve. So hi, I'm Lucia Nicholas, and I am a school psychologist. I've been a school psychologist at Saratoga Springs High School for 35 years, and it's where I began my career and where I've been lucky enough to stay, which I think is kind of a rarity in this day and age. But in any case, I've absolutely loved my job as a school psychologist, and I also see myself as a student advocate in that role, and I've really, really enjoyed working with families and with my colleagues and with outside agencies, throughout those 35 years. And so I hope that, between Steve's perspective and my perspective, we can kind of bring it all together, but knowing too that there may be points that Steve and I we may agree to disagree on, and that's okay too. So, so welcome everybody, and I hope that you'll find this useful.
Great, thank you, Lucia. Alyssa, when you're ready, if you could share the screen and the first slide, or maybe the second slide. Not the introductory slide, the slide after that. Great, yeah, the next one, please. Wonderful. So I just want to, we're not going to do this all day, but I'm literally going to read this slide to you, okay? I just want to read this. Today's themes to ensure success for student success at an annual review meeting. They're going to be preparation, communication, gathering information, sharing information, working together, teamwork, looking for consensus whenever we can, not conflict, and meeting the students' needs. Okay, so we're going to cover a lot of information. If you like to take notes, you might want to do that. Okay, great. Let's the next slide, please, Alyssa. Okay, Lou, are you starting this or am I? I forgot.
I think I am.
Okay, great, great.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the start of the school year, so I think what we wanted to emphasize here is the value of communication between teachers, the case manager for your child, for parents, and creating a strong communication with parents and guardians within those first 6 weeks of school. And so we want to make sure that communication is open and ongoing, and that we have a good basis for that to develop the relationship, between the school personnel and parents and the student, of course. So that's the first bullet. And then Steve, I think you were going to do email versus phone. You're on mute.
Still on mute.
Forget the
I'm
mute.
sorry, folks. I like it because I was like sniffling and stuff. Anyway, I typically point out obvious things. It helps me because I look for obvious things. If you know, we're starting at the beginning of the school year. Like best practice, that's how you're going to have a good annual review, is if you're doing things from the beginning, if possible. Now, communication, email versus phone versus meeting or even texting. How do you decide which to use? I think the first thing is accessibility. So whatever, some families don't have good Wi-Fi. So for example, while I really like to have virtual meetings, I think they're very efficient in terms of travel and whatnot. That isn't always a good thing for a family. So in terms of regular communication with schools and the team, your students have, I always say, let's do whatever the teacher or the social worker at the school does best. If they prefer to use email most of the time, then I promote email. If they want to use text messaging, and some teachers and professionals do with parents, I think that's great too. Maybe a phone call once a week or once a month, depending upon your student situation. So I want it to be best for everyone, but I always do say I'd rather have whatever's going to help for the professionals, because while parents might be busy, I know that professionals are busy as well, and they have a lot of students they're working with. So you just might have to discover that together by talking to each other. Okay, Lou.
Yep. So the next bullet is about grace period and some flexibility. So just from a secondary point of view, like middle school, high school, one thing that I think is important for parents to understand is that the teachers, the regular education teachers, are getting to know anywhere between 100 to 150 new students in September, right? And special ed teachers less, but still a lot of students. And so I often say that you can show us all everybody's IEPs in August and we can read through it, but there's not as much meaning to it until the teacher starts to interact with the students and the dynamic of the class starts to gel. So, we'd ask for some grace period and some flexibility. So, for example, I had a teacher that was very worried, a social studies teacher that was really worried, because on a student's plan, it said to seat the student near good students that are good models and away from distracting students. And her worry was, oh my gosh, I don't even know these students yet. So if you can give a little bit of time for the teachers to get to know the students, and for them to kind of get like a little bit of, a routine going, that would be terrific when it comes to different accommodations that are on the IEP. Steve, anything for that?
The only thing I would quickly add to that is, that might not be the case. It's always going to be the case, but like it's a lot of regular ed teachers in the high school and in middle school. That changes every year. Whereas I get it in elementary school, you might even have the same group of kids or a lot of the same kids following the same classroom year to year, including the special ed kids. So I just want to point that out, that it's a little bit different perhaps with kids who are a little younger, where the but it just, we're aware of that. I just want to point that out. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So then the parents and guardians being able to influence positive beginnings. I think that as nervous as we all are as parents at the beginning of a school year, your child is going to follow your lead emotionally, right? So if you are approaching the beginning of their school year with dread or with, oh my God, this is a new building, I've heard this about the building, I don't know how you're going to do, it's going to be so big, that doesn't help the student, right? And so even if you do, as a parent, have some nerves and some worries, that's to be, maybe more discussed among the other adults, like the school personnel. And if we can kind of shield the students so that they can go in and has a, have a positive outlook in terms of, starting the new school year with a new teacher or at a new building, then I think that's also can start to lay the, a firmer groundwork.
Yeah, I agree, Lou. And I would add that that is a role, like, we recognize that parents' experiences and their feelings and their emotions are all very valid. But I agree, if you're putting that on, if you're kind of expressing that around the house, it's not going to help your child moving forward. So that's a great role for a family peer advocate, to kind of be a support person, for you to have an advocate that you can just talk to, talk these things out, and they can support you in communicating with the school if you'd like. So I just wanted to point that out, that is a helpful thing. If you have good family that you can trust, like your own family members, those are good people to kind of work through some of your thoughts and concerns, and then you can bring them to the school district as well in a proper way that won't hinder your child in terms of emotions and anxiety.
And then the next, sorry.
Sorry.
So the next bullet has to do with problem solving together and coming together as a team. And obviously parents are going to be getting to know the school personnel and who's going to be working directly, with your child and vice versa. And so it's really important to take a problem solving approach, right? And so, we want to always, as throughout this whole thing, that's going to be a major theme, is coming together as a team. And along with that, when issues arise, write down your questions and contact the case manager. I think that's, in whatever way, like Steve was talking about, whatever, mode of communication is best, but to take that time and write down your questions. I know I've read in magazines, like, before you go see your doctor, write down the questions because you don't have enough time, and you're going to forget. And it's the same thing, like things may come up on the day to day, with your child. And so it's important, like if you're unsure about how something is working, or, what system the teacher's using for certain things, write it down and reach out to the case manager. And I put this in all bold for, in all caps for a reason. Please don't wait for the annual review meeting. Like, there's no reason to do that. You can have these conversations, you can have team meetings. There's lots of ways to communicate. It kills me. It hurts my heart when we get to the annual review and a parent is, talking about something that happened in September. Oh my gosh, let's deal with it in September. Don't wait until, that meeting and being at the table.
I would add too, I'm pretty sure that, like, case manager is a term in schools that is not common to parents and usually in elementary school. It could be, but even as Lucia is saying it now, I think that, it's great to get the case manager. The problem is you might not even know who the case manager is if you're not using that term as a parent. So what I always do is I don't even ask for the case manager. I just ask at the beginning of the year, or whenever I get involved in a case, who's the lead person? Who's the contact person? Is it the special ed teacher? Is it the social worker? Is it the school psychologist? Because it all varies school to school. Right. Yep. So the idea is identifying the go-to person, the initial go-to person. And typically that is the case manager, but you have to kind of know who that is first. So it's up to parents, I think, to ask that question. I also want to point out that, to Lucia's point about we don't want you to wait till the annual review if you're concerned about things. Whenever if I get a case in February, when parents are telling me things, I'm always asking, okay, when did that happen? Was that like last week? Was that before the holidays? Like, I don't want to get what's current events and what's not, to help them figure out how we're going to address it. So yeah, please don't wait. Schools want to know. And if you feel like your school doesn't want to know, they still need to know. So how are we going to help your child if we don't work together even if we're not getting along. So that's important. Okay, Lou.
Yeah. And then the last bullet on this one is school personnel to help parents understand how services work on the ground, like on the day-to-day. And I think that that's important because that varies by building. It varies by school district. You know, direct consultant teacher, I can tell you in my high school is 2 teachers in the classroom. Both teachers are helping all the students. And when it's a really great partnership, a lot of times the students don't even know who's the content teacher and who the special ed teacher is. And so to have an understanding of what that's going to look like on the day-to-day for your student is a really important aspect for, you know, for parents to understand and ask questions about. Absolutely.
Great. I agree. Next slide, please, Alyssa. Okay, I like the first bullet because again, I like to have overarching themes and I like to point out the obvious. So in terms of preparing for the annual review or any meeting, first, remember, this is for everyone at the table, not just the parents. What does the student need to access their education? Okay, so in the simplest way, that's services for kids like with a learning disability. What bridges are we helping them, or what skills are we teaching them? But I work with a lot of kids with mental health diagnoses. So a lot of times accessing education is more complex. It's not as simple as teaching them how to read or teaching them how to read at a higher level or whatnot. So that's the first point. Lou, I'm just going to roll and you jump in. You know, it's important to kind of know what the students' goals are. And I know if you're thinking about kindergarten or 5th grade, or maybe an 8th grader who might have some manipulation as one of their survival skills, you know, you might not be inclined to ask. But when I think of parenting or guardianship, you want to ask. We want to find out what the student is thinking. We want to know what their goals are. And their goals might not be realistic or helpful to them, but we should ask them at all ages, and certainly as we get into middle school and high school, especially high school, if they're going to be a part of the meeting, which often they are and often they should be. So you have to kind of ask them in any way that you know your child, whether you're the student, the teacher, or the parent. That's what I got there. Lou, what do you think? Anything else on that?
Yeah, no, I totally agree with what you're saying. And I think it's also the transition portion of the IEP we talk about at the high school when we're at meetings about the part of the IEP that changes probably the most, because you know, very few high school students know what they want to do with the rest of their lives, right? And we don't expect them to. But if they have a particular interest or they're thinking of college, and or they may change their mind about that when, you know, if they decide to, you know, do a career and technical program and they're like, no, now I want to be a plumber, you know, like all of that is okay to change and to modify. And we do need to, you know, listen to our students and to represent that, you know, at the meeting. Absolutely.
On parents and guardians' goals for student, you know, I think in a pure sense, we know what they need as we get to know, as we are seeing our kids grow and get older, we know what they need to learn. We know where their weak areas are, whether it be social, emotional, whether it be academics. The only trick here that I caution parents on is to make sure it's about the student, not about ourselves, you know, and that gets pretty deep. So I'm not really going to get into that too much. That's a whole deeper issue, but I think it's an important thing to try to recognize when you're thinking about the goals you want to have for your child. That's what later you'll see in this thing, we talk about writing them down, because I want people to really think about, okay, my goal does match up with what's going to be best for this, for my kid. So that's all I have to say about that. Lou, do you want to roll on the next, or?
Yeah, go on, keep on going. You're good.
Okay, so you know, we put this together and I said, well, I want to know, I think teachers should be thinking about goals for the student as well. Now, there are goals in the IEP, so you could say, well, they're there, I already know what the goals are, and that might be sufficient. That's great. I know, I will speak, my son is very articulate. He kind of, I hate to use this phrase, I don't think it's a very fair phrase, but in the vernacular, he's kind of a higher functioning person with autism. And we're very lucky and very blessed that way. He had speech therapy through 9th grade. And I think in some districts, I think in some districts, because a lot of his articulation, a lot of his understanding language was pretty good, he would have been cut off from that service, maybe even in middle school. But the speech therapist that picked him up, especially in ninth grade, really saw potential for him to learn more things, including like working on idioms, which for people with autism that are very literal, idioms are very confusing, you know? So, you know, that wasn't our push, my wife and I, that was her push. She goes, I want to have him have therapy still. We're going to work on this. And she did it for another year or two, I think. So that's a great example of a teacher or a therapist saying, I've got a goal for this kid. I want him to do more. I know that he can, or I believe that he can. So you know, I know teachers are busy, but I think it's important they come to the table with some, you know, just have some thoughts about that. That's all I got there, Lou.
Yep.
All right.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, good.
Oh, you go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just gonna keep moving. You just jump in. You know, I feel like teachers and parents often have similar goals, but I also feel like the perspectives they have, the student is the same focus, but their perspective is different. In other words, a parent's coming from home. Sometimes parents are like, I don't really care too much about what they learn as long as they're happy, or as long as they learn to handle their anxiety. Like if they're a C student, I'll take it. You know, I don't really care if they're a B or an A student. And the teachers, you know, their goals might be, they might not even get to thinking about that part of the student, because their job is to help a student learn. And the first line of defense or offense, if you were, is to teach academics. You know, that's what school is for primarily, initially. So I feel like that's that's why I think it's both important for both a teacher or a parent to come up with their own goals and then talk about them, and often I think the wording will start off maybe a little different, but as you talk about it, it'll probably form into a very similar goal, maybe with different strategies from both sides helping that student get to that goal. All right, okay, Lou, I'm gonna keep rolling, just jump in.
Yep, go ahead.
So I think it's important, again, teachers have and therapists have the IEP. I say here, list the goals in writing. So I think it's a lot to ask the teachers to relist their goals. So per se, I'm not asking them to do that, but I do think it's really important for parents to write out what your goals are, and especially as you're preparing. I mean, that's what I do with every parent I work with, is say, okay, so what do you want to see for next year? You know, for the annual review, what do you want to see for next year? So by writing it out, it helps you to formulate it better. So almost like a brainstorming thing. Or if you like, I say here, again, pointing out the obvious, you can type it out if you like, or you can write it by hand. But I think it's important to list it out and put it in writing so that one, you can see it. And if you see it, it might change. It's something when it's in your head, but when you see it in concrete, it might still be the same, or it might say, wait a minute, I don't know if I really want that, or maybe I have to develop it more. So it's really important to write it out. And then when it looks good to you, then you can share that with the team. Well, that's the next bullet. So it's really important, not just that you come in with your own agenda, but you want to make it the student's agenda, your child's agenda. So it's really important to kind of figure out what you're thinking about and looking for, and then sharing it with your case manager and whoever else is on your child's team at school. That's really crucial. And sometimes maybe you don't have a goal. Maybe you're not sure what you want, or you're not sure how to get there. I think it's fine to kind of share that ahead of time, saying, look, I want school to feel better for my son, or I want school to be less stressful for my daughter. And it's not about the studies, or it is about the studies. I think you should just share that. Give the team, everyone, an idea of where you're headed and what you're thinking about. It'll help shape the meeting and help shape what we want to do for the students so they could be successful. Anything to add to any of this stuff, Lou?
You know, the only thing I was going to think about is like the teachers. The teachers are always also mindful. I'm thinking specifically about 5th grade teachers, 8th grade teachers, and high school teachers in general are always thinking about developmentally, what does this student need? You know, just not only just the academics, but what kind of soft skills do they need to start to learn and start to incorporate to move them on to that next level, right? And so it's remiss of fifth grade teachers if they don't have in mind, okay, well, what does the middle school look like, and what's going to be expected of them, and how are we going to help them, you know, with their organizational skills and that sort of thing, and using an agenda, and at the high school level, how are we going to get them ready to transition into the adult world, whether that's to college or to a job or to the military or whatever that's going to look like. So I think that, to go back to the teacher goals, I think that's an interesting conversation to have, because, you know, we're in the business, we work with hundreds and thousands of students, you know, in this particular developmental, you know, area. But, you know, this may be your first child, right? And so you might not know some things that, well, oh my God, that's what the middle school is going to be like, or, oh, geez, that's going to be expected. So that's where those kind of conversations are super important as well.
Great. Okay, Alyssa, next slide, please. Is this me?
That's
I
you.
guess it is. Okay, so boy, you're gonna hear Lucia. I apologize. I'm leading all the beginning stuff. So ask questions of your teachers, the case manager, or share your concerns to your teachers, the case managers, the school psychologist, the social worker, the PT, the OT. Do that before the annual review. So that's kind of what Lucia was referencing earlier. Like, you don't want to come into the meeting. You know, I'll put it this way. Let me be a little anecdotal. I think one of the toughest things emotionally for parents to deal with in meetings is whenever we feel like we've been surprised, and when the meeting moves on, and it feels like we have no say in the decision that has been made. It feels like we've almost been sold. And that usually, like 98% of the time, comes from being surprised. So it's important, I always find, for parents to kind of know what's going to be shared, what is going to be suggested for next year ahead of time. That's why it's important to get triennial reports to read before you come to a triennial review. So, and I realized when I was professionally along the way, I realized, well, it's not just important for parents, it's important for teachers and the other professionals as well. Nobody wants to be surprised because you don't have time to think about the pros and the cons. So sharing your questions or sharing your concerns either on an ongoing basis as they come up, and certainly before you're going to meet for your annual review, share that with the team so people can come in prepared to discuss and go through that stuff. Anything on that, Lou, or no?
No, that's perfect. Yep, sounds good.
You know, I never pretend to be an educator or a psychologist or any kind of therapist. So when I say in the next bullet that education includes academics, social activities, extracurriculars, that's an important thing, certainly from an advocacy perspective. A lot of parents have heard things like, gee, you don't have to make a referral for special ed. Your child is too smart. Not everyone has heard that, but a lot of parents have. And I hear that a lot because that's often a backstory when I get involved with a kid that does not have special education that should. So I like to always highlight it is, of course, about academics and cognitive skill, but it's also about social activities. Again, a very simple example of a kid with autism. You know, I've not met one person with autism that doesn't want to be social. They might behave like they don't want to be, but that's really about they don't know how to do it often, or they've tried and then they've failed and they get kind of gun shy, so to speak. So social activities and social interactions are important to be taught to many of our students. Extracurriculars, you know, even the soft skills you learn from sports. We want all our kids to do sports or theater so they can learn soft skills by being around their peers. And some of our kids with disabilities need more support than that. So they have to have access to all of it. So I just like to remind people, sometimes the focus is on academics, but we have to remember, especially for special ed students, the education is about all these things. Another prep idea is, you know, recognizing and really, I think teachers recognize easily, but I think parents have to remember that learning styles vary. So that if it should be part of the discussion if it's not being addressed already? How does this student learn? What supports are they going to need to be able to learn? And what I love about being a parent is I don't have to have those answers. And I don't think one individual, teacher or otherwise, has to have the answer. You just have to be able to bring it up and talk about it together. There's a lot of great ideas that come from the team of the committee of the CSE. Okay. Academics, I just wanted to highlight a little bit that academics are the things that I think about are their grades, their tests, homework assignments that are completed and turned in. I mentioned that because of the symptomology, a classic symptomology of ADHD is kids that get their homework done, whether it be on paper or electronically, and don't submit it. The old school with if you have it in paper, they have it in their backpack, and somewhere between backpack at the house and school, like the parent sees it go into the backpack and school, it gets lost or at least never turned in. So these are real things because the student is learning, but might have a 0 in their homework grade because they haven't turned anything in this year. So I just like to point out that academics are important, and we always have to look at how the disability is impeding that progress.
And I would just add to that, the two things that I always think of, working in a high school and working with a lot of students with executive functioning difficulties and ADHD, I call all of their backpacks the black hole. It's just amazing. Like things go in and I don't know what happens to them. So I was telling Steve yesterday, I said, when I die and if I land up at the pearly gate, the first question I am going to have is, how do you finish an assignment but you don't hand it in? Like, how does that happen? Why would you do that? You've done all the work, and I've actually begged students to try to explain it to me. Some of them is because of perfectionism and that sort of thing, but it is a mystery that I have not been able to solve in 35 years. So not that I'm the brightest bulb in the chandelier, but it's a question I need answered at some point. So,
but I think that's a great, as you're talking right now, I'd like to point out, so I've known Lucia since college. So I'll just say that's before she started working as a school psychologist. So a lot of years. And she has always been extremely organized, whether it's by nature or by design by her that she's learned, I don't know, but she's extremely organized. So the idea that is confounding to her, how a student could get homework done and not turn it in, is a great example of like she just doesn't know. So in and of itself, that doesn't bother me. The way it becomes a problem for some students is if we don't advocate for the individual student, it can be expected, like, you know what, they're in 8th grade now, or they're in 8th grade. Next year, they're going to be a senior or a freshman. No one's going to be checking their backpack. Like, I get that. That's kind of the social norm, and it's a good expectation. But if you look at the last bullet, like, do there need to be strategies taught and modeled or practiced? To expect someone who is not organized by design or by nature to turn things in, and if they have a diagnosis that has symptomology, which is not just ADHD, but that is the classic one of not being organized and not getting things in, to expect them to just do that because they're turning 14, I'm going to be almost offensive here. It's ludicrous. It's ridiculous. It's an unreasonable expectation. So as adults, whether it be people from the school or the parents or the advocates, we have to advocate on behalf of that we need to teach kids this. We can't just expect it to change next year. And then we talk about how that's going to work. All right, I'm watching the time. So I hope that helped. Anything to add to that, Lou, or no?
No, I think we're good. We've got 7 slides to go, Steve. So we got
Let's go.
move
Okay,
along.
listen, we're ready for the next slide. Okay, I'm sorry, this is me quick again, but it's going to be a fast one. Helpful communication styles. Listen. Next one is hear what's being said. As a talker, I'm by nature a talker. I've become a good listener, but I've had to work very hard at it. I've had a lot of good models in that department. So when I started listening, the first thing I did was tell myself, stop talking. Really, I just shut up. Then I found myself hearing what's being said and then thinking about my next response. in part because I was maybe charged up about that, and in part because I'm not organized and I'm afraid I'm going to lose my thought. And then all I'm thinking about is my next thing. And the next 10 minutes go by, I didn't hear a damn word. So you have to hear what's being said. And for me, what I've developed this tool, where I've learned it, I should say, where I keep paper next to me and I jot down what pops in my head if I want to ask it or I want to mention it after, then I can get back to listening. Third bullet, listen. Fourth bullet, listen some more. Now I say that kind of as all this as kind of as a joke because I am such a talker, and it's still it's work. It's not hard work anymore, but it's work for me to listen because it's not my natural inclination. So I say that because whether you're a talker or a listener, it's really important to listen. And there's a lot of roadblocks to listening for people as emotional beings. I'll speak from a parent perspective. If I'm starting to get frustrated with what's being said about my kid, whether I'm right or wrong, I am starting to get upset, angry, flushed, and and I stop listening. So it's really important to try to be as objective as you can. Prepare for that before you go in, and then listen to people, write it down, and don't feel like you have to respond right then. Sometimes it's a matter of just saying, I want to make sure I heard you right. Are you saying that my son, that he will not have any support next year in ninth grade for his turning his homework in? Or are you saying the case manager will be giving him support? I just want to make sure I heard you. Great. So listen some more is important. Smile. I almost didn't want to put that in there because I didn't want it to seem like a cheap thing, like be fake. But I feel like if you can smile, like sometimes we don't think about what our face is doing. So if you can walk in and start with a smile, and if you can get frustrated while you're listening and just smile a little bit, it might just help you. And it certainly is going to help anyone else. So just think about that. And that leads to my next bullet there, relax. So again, I'm not trying to be condescending, but these meetings can be very stressful, especially if you've not had good experiences in the past. But the main thing, I think for everyone on the team, but I can certainly speak from an advocate perspective for parents and guardians, try to relax as much as you can. Today's meeting is not the end of the line, for good or for bad. Even if it's a good meeting, I like the idea of saying, I think I heard everything right. I want to get back to you tomorrow. I want to make sure I'll send you an email with the bullet points to make sure I think I got it all right and it sounds pretty good. I'll verify with you tomorrow just to make sure. Or if it went bad, it gives you a day to kind of talk with your advocate and realize we got to do something else. The way the law works, one meeting is never the end unless you're getting to due process sometimes, and that's a whole different scenario. And the last thing you should do for a good communication style, listen. Next slide, please. Oh, wait, Lou, is there anything on that you wanted to add?
No, that's great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Alyssa. Do you want me to do this too? My God, Lou, you did a lot more talking yesterday.
I think mine, I'm going to do more talking in another
All right.
slide or two. Don't you worry about it. Go ahead.
So I wanted to put here, especially I think it's good for all the adults, as I've been saying all day, but for parents, try to be thinking about, for communication style, articulating the difference or recognizing the difference between your thoughts, your feelings, and your emotions, and try to differentiate between them. So and again, this takes a little work before the meeting to kind of recognize what you're thinking about. So I just wrote an example. Let's think about a kid that's going to be going through the halls during passing period, and that's very difficult for them. So a thought that you might have is what I wrote here, that, gee, she will struggle because she'll feel anxious about being with groups of people. That's like a thought. It's not a feeling. You're saying she's going to do something. She will struggle because of this experience, because of this situation. Now, a feeling that I might have about that is that, we're going to have her go through the passing period. We're not going to do anything different for her. Or it just doesn't come up yet and you're concerned about it. So you say, your feeling might be, well, this makes me feel very worried or very nervous or very anxious because in the past, she has not been able to get through passing period, or she doesn't get through her day. And I know it's because she tells me she can't stand the noise and all the people in the crowded hallways. So that's kind of a feeling when you recognize, are you feeling worried or you're feeling nervous? And that's fine to share, but I think we don't want to put those two things together, like kind of have our feelings make demands of a situation. That's not going to be a good problem solving skill. And the other thing is in terms of like, how do you articulate objective information? So that's, I think it can be hard for parents because again, we're thinking from an emotional perspective, which is important. But like I wrote here, so to say something like when she's in large groups of people, she feels anxious or nervous. And when she feels like that, and I used a very poor, obvious, it's a good example, but it's not a very realistic one. But I wanted to make a point about how this bad this could be. When she feels anxious in a group of people, she shoves people out of the way so she can get through the halls as quick as possible. Now that could be a person with autism, person with anxiety, could be a person with, oh my God, like DMDD. So those are all different diagnoses, but the behavior is the same. And our understanding of the diagnosis can make the difference about whether we judge them or not. So we see a kid pushing other kids, we're like, that kid's a jerk. Oh, they shouldn't be doing that. Oh, that's not right. Well, I think we agree. So the idea of articulating objective information, though, like this statement leads us to what are we gonna do about it? There's got to be something we can do about this. And the last bullet there is if a student's going to be in the meeting, they should also be prepared if they're comfortable sharing this. And you can, both a social worker, a teacher, a parent can help them almost practice this. Not have it scripted per se, unless they're very anxious, then scripted is very helpful. But to help them communicate what they're feeling and what they're thinking and the differences of those things. So I just think it's important to basically to differentiate between what you are feeling and what you are thinking and be able to bring that to the meeting. And the same for the student if possible. Lou, no?
Yeah, good.
Okay,
Good.
next slide, please, Alyssa. All right,
Okay.
this is Lou, all right.
Okay. So what we're talking about here is when it's time for updated evaluations and PLEP's present levels of performance section of the IEP. So you want to be aware of the date of your child's reevaluation, and you can find that right on their IEP, or again, you can call the school psychologist in your building or the case manager. It's there. We have to abide by it, and we test students every 3 years. Best practice is that we would like for you to share, for parents to share with us any outside evaluations. And this is where Steve and I are going to have to agree to disagree. From my point of view, the reason why, as a school psychologist who does the reevaluations, the reason why it's important to get and receive an outside evaluation is, let's say in the summertime, you know, your child, you brought them to an outside evaluator, which is totally your right. And that outside evaluator has administered the Wechsler Intelligence Scale for Children, 5th edition, okay? And then it so happens that I am going to be testing them in November. It is important for me to know that they've been given that test, because I can't give that test because there's a practice effect, because it's too soon after they've been given that particular assessment. And so it is, you know, and it does, a lot of the outside evaluations, there are aspects to a number of them that are more of a clinical nature. Some of it is easily transferable to the educational environment. Some of that is a bit tougher. But it is good and it's informative, you know, for us to have that information if you are willing to share it. And so, Steve, I know you've got something to say about this.
Well, first of all, I don't disagree with what you're saying. And you know, what you're saying too, like it would invalidate, if you did the test after it was already done within that example, I think less than 12 months, it invalidates the results. So there's the whole complex thing. So I agree with you on all that. The only thing I would say is, you know, I've experienced where a student that was diagnosed with autism, a few years later gets evaluated by an outside psychologist trying to get an update, and then is diagnosed with ADHD. And that's all they diagnose. So it doesn't take away from the autism. The autism is still there, but the ADHD might be if I just turn that in, if there was, I just feel like if I turn that in, it might have the school focusing just on the ADHD. And that's really just one diagnosis that's comorbid with autism very, very often. So if in this report, that's the only new information is the new diagnosis, but there's nothing different about the student, then I'm inclined to say there's no new information. There's just a new diagnosis, but the information, the symptoms are still the same. And I have that kind of validated through the report on that said ADHD. Then I'm hesitant because I don't want the school. To me, autism is it's more complex than ADHD might be, certainly in how it's viewed at least. So I would just be cautious about that. I am not advocating for withholding information and not sharing with the school. What I'm trying to say is that's one example of if it's not, I don't think it was really going to help the school more, and it might hinder that student if they kind of see him through a different lens that is less comprehensive than who they really are. I hope that was articulate enough.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and then third bullet being consulting with the school psychologist, parents, obviously, and I consult with the teachers, the case managers, the parents about, like when I finish testing a student, I send my first draft to the case manager, which is the special education teacher that sees the student, and to the parent. And always with the idea of, let's talk. Let's meet before the CSE meeting. Again, no surprises. Let's discuss it. And I think it is important to discuss the results. And also, from the parent point of view, like part of, my career, what I was trained in is a lot of jargon and a lot of math and standard scores and percentile ranks and all this sort of thing. And so there's a learning curve to all of that, for anybody. So we can talk about what do those scores mean, and what assessment tools were used, and what, if you're worried about a particular score, well, what did you actually test in this area, so we can have those conversations. The other thing I wanted to mention is that sometimes when you see the numbers and the numbers are explained to you, it can be very upsetting. And I want to also emphasize that at any time in a reevaluation, it is a snapshot, right? So being at the high school level, I can tell you that one of the absolute blessings has been that I have been able to work with some students all 4 years that they're in, like from 9th grade to 12th, and it's wonderful to see the arc of their growth. The other thing is when I do the testing, I consider myself a historian. So I take these, psych files that are like this big by the time they're in high school, and I go back to the first page oftentimes to preschool, reports and that sort of thing. And I put it all together, sequentially. And I was telling Steve last night, I said, there are so many times where as I'm reading through everything like a history, and I look at what the concerns were when the students were in preschool or those early, years of elementary school, I'm reading it and I'm like, I can't believe this is the same kid who's getting a Regents diploma, And so while some of the numbers, especially if you have younger children, may be upsetting to you, just understand that kids are resilient, that there's a lot of brain plasticity and a lot of development and a lot of changes that are going to happen from those early years right on through. And even with, the so-called IQ score, there is variability. Very, very seldom have I seen the exact same scores all the way through. There are sometimes themes and areas that students tend to struggle with, like processing speed or their working memory or something like that. But generally speaking, the numbers change. So I guess I would caution you not to get too upset, but to also ask the questions so that you understand, kind of where is your child in this snapshot? Where are they functioning that day? And here's the other thing is that sometimes it's a bad day and it may not be an accurate reflection. And I try to put that in my reports, if I feel like it might be an underestimate of what the student can do if they have that kind of emotional overlay going on for them, during that particular school year. So I just wanted to mention that to all of you. And classroom performance and test results to guide the PLEPs. So that's where the case managers, the special ed teachers will take my report, but they're also really leaning into what are they seeing in the classroom. And the day-to-day is really the most important thing, because I've seen students whose scores are, where you would pray that your kids' scores would be. Like me, I gave birth to two average kids, but you would wish, like, hey, some of these kids have like scores in the superior range in areas, and yet in the classroom, in the day-to-day, they're a mess. And so you have to kind of balance that out, and you have to really, really lean into how are they functioning, and what kind of supports do they need to be successful, during their school day. So, anything else, Steve, that I'm missing on that?
No, I think that's great, Lou. Next slide, Alyssa. Thank you. Do you want me to start?
You want to do I think you've got the first
Okay.
3, and then I got the last 4. Yeah.
So again, back to the non-academics part of education. So it's easy to say, hey, this, join some clubs. I want my kid to join a club or be in a sport or sporting, or how do they access social events? So I think what's important here is to kind of look at rules that might impede this. So a very simple one with sports. So if you have a student that goes to an out of district day program and they're playing football, and they have that right, and they're able to do it. They're able to be at that program and then come back to the district after school, but they're late to practice, and we know they're going to be late because of the bus. So if the coach is like, well, you're late, you can stay at practice, but you're not going to play this week. That's how we set the rules up. Like, there has to be an accommodation made for that. And so we might all sit here and say, well, that would never happen, but it can, or maybe it has. So the idea is that we have to advocate for that. We have to be aware of that. We have to ask questions of that. Same thing for dances or clubs, if a student needs some, I get it. Like, when it comes to after school things, it gets tricky. I understand that as an advocate. I understand that the law is a little tricky, and there might not be any requirements by the law for schools to have accommodations to support kids in social, emotional ways of things. But with not having read up on that for today's training, I would just say that these are conversations that should be had, solutions should be looked for. And if need be, we can still look at, well, what is required by law and what's not. But these are really important things, and it can make the difference in their grades too. If a student is happy because they're in the drama club that has a disability, and then they feel better, they're more inclined to work harder at their other stuff. So I think that's important. Peer groups, Lou, is that you or is that me? Or I think that
was
kind
you.
of, yeah, I just think the idea of sometimes we have to help our kids find peer groups. Sometimes we have to make them. They're easier to make at the elementary school level, just because, like with most people, kids don't form opinions as quickly. So if we bring them up in an elementary school where we're all just peers, regardless of disabilities or not, chances are that'll be the same peer group that goes through high school. So I just think we have to kind of foster that a bit and be aware of that. Lou, I think you said the next one.
Oh, I think I've got this,
Yep.
this one. So getting your child involved in community organizations or not-for-profits, I think, is a really, really important thing, especially if you're planning on staying in your community. One of the things I love about our high school is seniors have in May a senior give back day. And it's like, to give back to the community that's supported, all of the kids as they have come up through the years, to give back and to do volunteer work and get involved in community organizations, I think is a really, really healthy thing. And it also allows your kids to sometimes meet students who maybe some students they meet when they do this volunteer stuff, they go to like private schools and they may never have met them. So it just gives more opportunities for social connections. The next one being following their passions. I think that to know your kid and to know what they're interested in and to try to provide opportunities, as much as you can. And always start with, what's out there that's free that we can get involved with, that is reflective of, of what my kid is into or interested in. And that changes. I probably have more books on the history of New York City or on the Titanic than anybody. I rival anyone to come and compare their book collection to mine, because my son was just into those two things, for the longest time. He loved New York City, loved the Titanic, which is a little, disaster related, obviously, but he was fascinated by it. So following their passions. And then the next, Steve, anything on that one or?
No, I thought it was great.
Importance of balance. So, you guys, as parents and as older parents, I think we do have to be careful of overscheduling, having students getting involved in dance and then soccer and then this and then that. It's just a funny example. We had neighbors of ours who their kids were involved in all of the above, the soccer, the dance, the everything. And my kids, it was one activity every season, fall, winter, spring, and that was it. And my neighbor laughingly, kind of her daughter was complaining about, how late, they were coming home and how late they were eating. And I think she said something to her mother like, oh, well, the Nicholases aren't home either. And her mother said, no, the Nicholases are in bed right now. Because we couldn't, they were eating at like 8 o'clock at night and I can't, I'm asleep by then, So, and our kids, like they followed suit, right? So we were early to bed and they were rather early to bed. Anyway. So, so the importance of balance is really, really a good thing. Of course, you want them to have those opportunities outside of school to connect and to do fun things, but be careful that you're not overscheduling. Or,
Can I just add to that? Again, just to point out what I hope is obvious is like, it's, the suggestion there is about recognizing, regardless of what your child might be saying, that it might just be too much. And even if they are telling you they like it and they think that they do, I mean, I'm making a value judgment here, but I think the thing to think about is like, if all their time is taken up, how do they have downtime when they're doing all of that and throughout the whole season? So I recognize it's a value judgment, but I think it's important if you look at it from the kid's perspective that maybe it's too much. Maybe they need to make some time to have themselves. Anyway, like leisure reading, maybe.
That's right. Yeah. And
Anyway.
I think all of this, it relates to annual review and stuff, because this is, your child is not just a student, they're a whole person, right? And I know with the teachers that I know that, the different interests and stuff about their students, it's wonderful. And it enriches the whole annual review and meeting process. So for the older students, a paid job or volunteering somewhere, so many of our kids are dealing with anxiety and depression. And, basically research has shown that two things, exercise and volunteering, so getting out of your head, are just as effective as a lot of psychotropic antidepressant medications. So getting your child to do something and to do something purposeful, and helping another person or getting a paid job. I have to say, we're talking about executive functioning and organization. I've had so many students that were an organizational nightmare, and then they got a job. And you would think it would make it worse. It actually made it better. It helped to organize them. And they knew, because they didn't have as much time, that they had to kind of parcel out their time more wisely. And it really has made, a difference. And I'm talking, of course, the high school students. Those are my people. The last part of this I just want to mention is, as your students are moving up from elementary to middle school, is the loss of play dates as children get older. And that's a hard thing, like it was lovely when we could control their social lives, at the elementary level. And then I know for my two children, when they went to middle school, all of that changed, and not in a good way for my particular kids. They really wasn't until they went to college that they found their people. but that's something that may be, something that we have to deal with. And there's a grief process and sadness that goes along with that too, for us as parents and certainly for the kids. But you want to try and give them as many opportunities to connect with other people then if the school kids are not their people. So anything on that one, Steve?
No, I don't think so. Next slide, please, Alyssa. That's you.
Okay, that's me. Right. Okay, so building positive rapport between school personnel, students, and families during the course of the school year. And what I'm gonna give an example of what can sometimes get in the way of building this rapport. Sometimes what can happen is, and I was telling Steve about this particular example, in our district, about later elementary school, a student and their family transferred into our district from a district across the country. And they did not have a good experience with that previous school district. So when they came to us, it was like the fists were out, there was no trust, there was nothing, and it wasn't pretty. And so it took years of work to cultivate, that level of trust. And sometimes those past experiences can inform, how a parent approaches the school, and then people can get defensive back and forth, and it never ends up pretty, and we have to remind ourselves this is for the student, right? So we have to kind of come together and again work as a team, and sometimes we have to leave the past experiences at the door, and just give this new group or new team a chance as the year goes on. I think it's also important for adults to be checking in with adults. So one of the things that happened in that example I just shared was that because the previous school district and situation was so negative, the parents were telling the student all the things wrong that the previous school was doing. And so the parents were kind of saying, well, if this happens and that happens, you come home and tell us. That puts the student in a really, really tough position. And I don't think that that's healthy. I don't think it's, personally, having worked with, at this point in my career, hundreds of students that have been through horrible divorces or situations like this where it becomes very confrontational in terms of parents and school personnel. The person who suffers when the adults can't come together and work together is the student. I'm going to put a hard stop there. I know it's not always easy. I know that sometimes teachers screw up, or the teacher your kid has isn't the right fit for them. And for that, I'm sorry, but try your best not to put the student in the middle. And I tell you what happens in adolescence. If you keep doing that, and this is when the rubber hits the road in terms of getting credits, the implicit message to that older student is, shush, you don't have to listen to them. You don't have to be respectful of the teachers. You don't have to, because your parents are on your side. They'll fight, they'll fight for you or whatever. And then what happens? Their grades plummet. I can't even tell you how many times I've seen it, and it does not help the student. It doesn't serve the student in the end. So that goes together with adults checking in with adults and adults working together as partners. I have special ed teachers who feel really strongly about this next bullet, actually 3 bullets, because I asked some of my colleagues and they said that they feel it's really important to ask parents for advice on how to best support their child. Parents know their kids best. That's the bottom line, and so we are interested in what works, what may trigger them, what may, is there a time of year that's hard for them? Is there an anniversary we should know about that we should, so that we know that they're going to be a little off, or whatever. And school personnel showing respect for parents and their knowledge of their child. That is so, so important. And I know that there are parents who do feel disrespected and feel like they're being just talked at. And that's not how we want it to go in terms of the relationship. And then students benefit from adults working together as a team, going back to that theme all over again. So Steve, did I miss anything on that one?
No, I think you covered it very well. Yeah. Thank you. I'm not sure what's next. Okay.
Yep. That's you.
That's me. Are you sure? Okay. So And we're almost, I just want to point out, we know it's after 1 o'clock. We're almost done. I think this might be the last slide, but I don't remember. So if you do have questions you haven't asked yet, this would be a good time to put them in the chat box. And we can address them as we, because we're going to have a hard stop at 1:30 today. So considerations for both parents and school personnel. So for parents, any reflection and awareness about your personal experiences with school. So we were talking about this, Lucia and I, and that's kind of twofold. In the example she just used, so your experiences as a parent, like for your kid, that's one thing. But also for some parents, it's reflecting about your experiences with your own schooling, perhaps, especially in districts where your kids are going to school where you went to school. You know, I do a lot of work I do all my work currently in Schenectady County, and in Schenectady City schools, I have had teachers who had the parent and then who's teaching the other student now, you know, and there's one example I'm thinking about that was a very positive thing. The parent liked that teacher and felt very trusting towards them. So that's an easy, simple example of a positive thing. But a lot of times we don't have, as parents, we might not have had good school experiences when we were students, and then also our experiences with districts sometimes are not positive for our students. So I think like it's important just to reflect on that, because that can really inform how I'm going to behave or how I'm going to interact with my child's team. You know, if I can recognize like, I don't like that person. I'm like, okay, well, but like, especially at the elementary level, well, you're probably not going to have to deal with them next year. You know, well, that's not true. It's true in a lot of places, even high school. But so like, let's try to get through this year. How's your child doing? Are they doing pretty good? You know, so when I ask a parent, hey, how's it going this year? If they start talking about all their issues, I listen. I'm like, how's Johnny doing? He's doing okay. All right. So I like to, let's talk about that. And it doesn't mean there shouldn't be a communication between the parent and some of the adults or the adult they're having a problem with. This is a good opportunity to kind of try to resolve whatever working problem there might be, but to kind of reflect and see that there's a difference between what Johnny's issues might be, your child's issues, or my own issues. You hitting the next one, Lou, or is that me?
Yep. So, and then just on the reverse for the school personnel to understand, it's okay to talk to school personnel about your own experiences, and it'll help for school personnel to understand that, yeah, we've got to build some trust here. The next bullet, importance of fostering honesty, trust, and respect. This is what I tell my students is the Mrs. Nicholas, a lecture, or 30-second lecture on healthy relationships. It's a three-legged stool. The three legs are honesty, trust, and respect. Okay. If we pull off one of the legs of those stool, what is going to happen when you try to sit on the stool? You are going to land on your butt on the floor. It's not going to work. So you must work on honesty, trust, and respect in your relationship, between parents and school personnel. And it's absolutely a two-way street. The next one we kind of covered already, which is ask parents for advice on how to best support their children. For parents, I put in this one, being willing to share the good, the bad, and the ugly. So, I will tell you, my son had an IEP from middle school into the end of 9th grade, and he had a lot of really intense math anxiety. And so, when I went into the meetings, and again, I'm a school person, so I naturally trust other school people. I had to admit, I'm like, I suck at math. I can't. I don't know what to do. Not only am I bad at math, I am bad at teaching. We can sit and talk about a problem all day long because I'm a psychologist, but I cannot teach math. I can't teach anything. I stink at it. And so, being able to just admit that to the teachers, just so they understand, what do I got to do? In the end, get a tutor, obviously, for him, because I sure as heck couldn't do it. But just to understand that sometimes that helps the relationship between the parents and school personnel as well. And both ways, many of the school personnel are going to be parents themselves. And so, kind of trading some stories, war stories, as I think of them, and is important also for kind of establishing that bond and that open communication. And I think that, go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, you go ahead. I'll finish. You go ahead.
Nothing, just like if things are not going well for your child, approach the problem, in a problem-solving way, not accusations, not blame. Let's problem solve this together, which has again been a theme through our whole morning, or our whole workshop, I should say.
On the fifth bullet, I was going to add, Lou, that the idea of sharing the good, the bad, the ugly with your child as a parent, that you're not good at certain things. And that
Absolutely.
example that you shared, I think, is so important because it's like a sense of validation. Like, okay, like, because most teenagers and kids think it's just about them and that no one else has their struggles. And so for the parent to say, I'm terrible at math, I think there's something validating about that kid knows I'm not the only person that has trouble with this. And there's other ways to get help, outside of my parents. I just think that's really, and also gives a sense of hope, because then hopefully the child can see that their parent is doing a good job parenting, and that, they made it out of high school and they're successful. And that's even true, I think, if the parent did not get a diploma, because they're doing so many things already, raising a family, trying to keep things together and do well. It's still a hope inspiring thing. And I also want to quickly go back to the third bullet and honesty, trust, and respect. I think too, like, that means taking chances, for parents to take a chance, which ties into the story Lucia told about the family that moved from a different district. So instead of giving a chance, they got their defenses up. And it's hard to give people chances, but I think that in year to year, you don't know a new teacher perhaps, or a new social worker to your student. It's important to, what I want to say is you have to take a little risk. That's how relationships grow. And with that, you might be, as a parent out there, you might be inclined to say, yeah, but I do that, and then the whole year goes by and my kid was lost. Well, I don't say just trust and that's it. I say take a chance and go back to our other points for the day. Communicate in a month. How's it going? Let's get some more information about what's happening in the classroom or in your sessions at school with them. So I just think all these things put together can really help. What's the next slide there, Alyssa? I can't believe it. This has to be the last one.
It is the last one. It's the last one. We can
Go
I can go through this really quickly if
Yeah.
you want, or do you?
No, go ahead. I'll jump
Okay.
in if I think I need to.
Just preparing your child if they're going to be present at the CSE meeting. I know in my district, it's the middle school and the high school students are present. And just to let your child know that, if they can stay for as long as they want, they can participate, they can, but to preset them for what the meeting's like, what it's going to look like, if they want to write something to say at the meeting, we welcome all of that. So that's something to think. Don't panic about. Go ahead.
I want to jump in real quick. Parents, if you're a lot of parents, they've never had their child at a meeting and they're worried about it, either for the child or for themselves. I would encourage, if you're thinking that now and it hasn't happened, you should talk with someone you trust at the school about this and about both of you prepping your child. Or if you're like, look, my kid doesn't really know what's good for them, that's fine, but let's talk about it as the adults, like Lucia said earlier today. And then we can come to some realistic goals for them based on their presentation at the meeting of themselves, and also what the adults will know is helpful for them. Thanks, Lou.
Yep. So the next is don't panic, because as Steve already said, this is not the be all and the end all. You have the right to always call a meeting. We can have a team meeting. We can have another, program review, whatever it is. Don't panic. And then understanding the new building and levels. So elementary to middle to high school to the adult world. That's where those ongoing conversations are going to be really important for you to have a feel for what that next level is going to be like. And if there's an orientation evening or event, absolutely, take part in that and encourage your students to take part in that. Keeping your sense of humor is really important in this whole process, because heck, it's important just being a parent and working in education anyway. Knowing what triggers you at each individual level, like if something happened to you when you were in elementary school versus middle versus high school, we've kind of talked about that in terms of what you bring to the table as a parent or as an educator. Your child is going to follow your lead regarding your emotions and transitions. So if you are show them that you are terrified about them going to middle school, guess who's going to be terrified? They're going to be terrified, So try and, again, talk with other adults about your worries or your concerns, but try and make it as positive and comfortable as possible for your child when you're dealing with this time of transitions. And if your child asks you questions, I used to stop my son at 8 o'clock at night and I'd say no more questions because he asks so many on a daily basis. If you can't answer their question, then let them know, I don't know the answer to that, honey, but I am going to find out and I'm going to get back to you. And then, and then do what you can as a parent to help them. So that's
great.
all I got.
Next slide, Alyssa. All right, we made it. Okay.
Sure.
So again, I just like to bookend how we started, and I hope as I won't read through them again, but if you can look at these as we're here, I hope that this makes sense, that it's not just one meeting, it's really a relationship and several relationships to kind of help your child be successful, not only at their annual review meeting, but also throughout the year. Yeah, I think that's all we have. Are there questions that need to be asked, people, Jen or Alyssa?
Sure, there's just a couple questions in the chat. The first one is, how do you articulate objective information as a goal?
All right, could you read me that one more time?
Sure. How do you articulate objective information as a goal?
My first thought is the way I do things is I would write down, I would brainstorm. So as that is being shared, like, well, how would I, like, to me, like, they're not necessarily objective information it doesn't necessarily become a goal. It might just be objective information. So I'd need more info on that. Goals are things like, what do you want to attain? Like, that's when I think about a goal, what do I want Lucia to learn by the end of the school year? So I'm not really sure how else to answer that, except I would want to flesh it out by writing. Lou?
Yeah, no, I'm thinking if they're referencing the walking in the hallway piece, that can also be part of like a counseling goal, right? And so one of the things that you can talk about is, helping, Mary learn some positive strategies on how to deal with her anxiety when she's in unstructured school settings, and that kind of thing. So that can play into the counseling goal or and an educational goal and that sort of thing. That's what that's what I'm connecting it to.
Sounds good.
The next question is, what soft skills should a parent consider for a child moving from kindergarten to first grade?
I'm smiling because my very first thought is none. Soft skills. I don't think I even knew what a soft skill was till I was in college. Soft skills. I hate to sound like a broken record, but I feel like you'd have to look at the child, like kind of what are their strengths and what are their needs. And that's how I would develop that. I don't know, Lou, yeah.
Yeah, no, what I'm thinking is what might be helpful is to, for the parent to maybe, have a conversation with a first grade teacher and compare, like, what are the expectations going to be in first grade versus what they've been in kindergarten. This way the parent can kind of, maybe work with the student, through the spring and summertime in making that transition from kindergarten to first grade.
Sounds good to me.
The only other thing is a comment that said, I sent an email to begin the lines of communication, scheduling a phone call or setting up a form of communication that best works for all. So maybe some of your comments have initiated some communication already. So if sorry, there's another comment that's coming. How do we get the school to use the IEP or 504 from preschool to kindergarten?
So Steve,
Yeah.
can you speak to this? Because I have an idea, but that's
Well,
also
you
not my
start.
age.
Why don't you start? I'll jump into that. You start, Lou.
Yeah, so depending on the district, there should be, whether it's the team of people from the actual elementary school that your child is transitioning into, or whether it's a district person. So we have like a district CPSE chairperson, along with school psychs from each of the buildings that will go and observe and, and try and make that transition too. So I believe this is the time of year where they're starting to schedule those meetings for students who are receiving services at the preschool level, to then, have a meeting, like a CPSE meeting, to figure out what, is this going to continue on into kindergarten? And so that should be considered, their previous IEP or 504 plan at the preschool level should be considered as the student is transitioning into kindergarten, I think.
Yeah. I mean, my just general, my general feeling about CPSE, the CSE, the question was, I think, how do you ensure that the IEP gets in place? Is that accurate? Then, Jen, yeah.
I think it says, how do we get the school? So I do think that that's another interpretation of the question, Steve. Like, what if you like your preschool services, and how do you get them to do the same thing in the school, and whether that's appropriate or not.
Conversation with the CPSE chair at the district, I think, is how you begin, but I don't know.
So it's an interesting thing, because I would say it's not necessarily, from an advocate perspective, it's not necessarily a slam dunk that a kid that has an IEP in preschool will get one for school age, for kindergarten. I feel like emotionally, I feel like it should be. I feel like I've seen kids get declassified, or I've heard about it after the fact, from preschool to kindergarten. And on a personal level, I just feel like that is one of the most ridiculous transitions to mess with. Why? Maybe into first grade. Let's get them into public school and make sure they really have those skills solidly. That being said, the way I would do that procedure, like, I like the idea of having conversations, and if that'll work, that's great. But if you feel like your child needs that IEP in kindergarten, and it's not just based on your emotions, but your objective, boy, they're still having trouble doing this and doing that, they're not going to make it without support, then I would use, I would say contact an advocate if you don't have any of those skills or that information. Hopefully, I don't want to get adversarial, but there's a point in advocacy where you may have to, if you feel like you've got a really good case, but your student needs this IEP. So I would find an advocate to kind of help you through that, and hopefully you wouldn't need that process. That's what I shoot not to do. Does that answer okay? Any thoughts? Yeah.
I think that's right. I'll say one thing, that if your child is declassified, don't assume that the kindergarten age teacher knows that they were classified. So you may want to share that information with your kindergarten teacher, so they can keep an eye out for your child in kindergarten. It does say here, I think some questions were submitted beforehand about when is it a good idea to have an attorney at an annual review. As an attorney, maybe like never, but go ahead. I'll let you guys jump in.
I would say I've learned from my attorney friends who've trained me, like Jennifer Monty, like, you don't want that unless you don't want that at a CSE meeting. You just don't. Because number one, if you do, then the school district will bring theirs, and you automatically have set up an adversarial situation, which is antithetical to a CSE meeting. A CSE meeting is supposed to be collaborative. That's the goal. And you have the most power when you can be collaborative as a parent. That's what I would say. Jen, would you, Lou, yeah, Jen, would you add to that? Do you think that's...
The only thing I would say is that I really would highly encourage you to use all of the strategies that you heard today before trying to introduce an adversarial type of relationship. And this is from the perspective of my organization. We send attorneys into meetings, and I've attended many, and have very good collegial relationship with school districts attorneys. But the hope is that this process can be done without attorneys involved. And so I think if you're asking the question and you haven't tried any of the strategies that are here being presented today, I would encourage people to do that. So I think we're coming to the end. We're at the last minute, so I want to thank our speakers today. Just as a reminder, when you log out of the session, you're going to be directed to a brief evaluation. Your feedback is very valuable to us in terms of planning these sessions, and moving forward. And I'll just remind everybody that our next Lunch and Learn session will be held on April 10th, and the flyer will be shared soon. So I invite everyone back. But meantime, I want to thank our speakers today for this great conversation and a wonderful demonstration of how parties that come at issues from different sides can work collaboratively together to come and find solutions for our students so that they can have the greatest amount of success. So thank you both for sharing all of your knowledge with us today, and thank you for joining us during this training.